The valley was silent when the Navy SEALs began their mission. The air was cool, and the night sky was filled with stars that shimmered above the desert. Lieutenant Harris, the team leader, checked his watch and then gave a silent signal to move. They had only one goal: to locate the safe house of a dangerous insurgent leader who had been planning attacks against U.S. forces. The mission was meant to be simple: go in, gather intel, and get out before sunrise. But nothing about that night would go as planned. The SEALs moved like shadows through the rocky terrain. Every step was quiet, every breath controlled. Their boots pressed into the sand without sound, their eyes scanning every ridge and corner. These men were trained for the hardest missions, the kind that tested nerves, patience, and teamwork. The operation had been planned for weeks. Satellite images had shown little enemy movement. The area seemed safe enough for a quick in-and-out mission. Still, something felt strange to Harris. The valley was too quiet. They reached a vantage point that overlooked a cluster of old stone houses. Through night vision goggles, Harris watched the buildings for signs of life. A faint light flickered in one of the windows, maybe a candle, maybe a signal. He radioed to command, whispering, "Target area in sight. Holding position." The reply came with static, but it was clear enough. "Copy that. Proceed with caution." As the SEALs split into pairs and took their positions, the wind began to rise, carrying dust across the valley. Harris felt uneasy. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural. He could feel it in his gut. The mission was going too smoothly. He gave the signal for the team to move closer to the houses. They crept forward, rifles raised, every sense on high alert. The first team entered one of the buildings. It was empty. The second house was also deserted. Then they found something chilling: food still on plates, fresh footprints, and a map spread across a table with U.S. patrol routes marked in red ink. Before Harris could even process it, the radio crackled again, this time filled with heavy interference. "Eagle 1, this is base. You have..." And then silence. The connection was gone. Harris tried again, but only static came through. The extraction team was supposed to pick them up at dawn. Without communication, they had no way of knowing if their helicopter was still coming. The tension grew. One of the younger SEALs, Carter, whispered, "Sir, I don't like this. It's too quiet." Harris nodded but said nothing. He looked through his scope toward the ridge above them. Something glinted for just a moment, like light reflecting off metal. His pulse quickened. "Take cover," he hissed. The words had barely left his mouth when the first gunshot rang out. Bullets tore through the walls of the old house, sending dust and debris flying. The SEALs dropped to the ground, returning fire from the windows and doorways. They couldn't see the attackers, but they could hear them shouting, voices coming from multiple directions. The team was surrounded. Harris realized what had happened. They had walked straight into an ambush. The safe house wasn't their target's hideout. It was bait. Rounds cracked through the air as the team scrambled for cover. The radio was dead, and they had no support. Harris shouted for his men to fall back toward the rocks behind the houses. "Move! Move!" he yelled. Two SEALs laid down suppressive fire while the others dragged the wounded out. The enemy fire was relentless, echoing through the valley like thunder. By the time they reached the rocks, 2 men were injured, and ammunition was running low. The enemy had the high ground, firing from the ridges above. Harris's heart pounded as he scanned the ridge through his scope. He could see dozens of silhouettes moving. They were badly outnumbered. Still, he couldn't let panic set in. "We hold here," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're not going anywhere." As they returned fire, the first rays of dawn began to rise over the horizon. The valley that had looked calm hours ago now felt like a death trap. Dust filled the air. The sound of bullets bouncing off rock echoed all around them. Harris knew they couldn't hold out for long. He thought of his men, the youngest barely 23, the oldest nearing 40. Every one of them trusted him to get them home. He tried the radio again, desperate for a signal. Nothing but static. The helicopter was nowhere in sight. His only hope was that someone had heard their first message before the line went dead. The SEALs were trapped, cut off, and surrounded. Each man checked his ammo count, only a few magazines left. Harris took a deep breath. "We're SEALs," he reminded them. "We don't die easy." The men nodded, faces streaked with dust and sweat. They tightened their grips on their rifles, ready to make their last stand. Harris looked once more at the ridge, watching the enemy figures move closer. The odds were impossible, but surrender wasn't an option. He knew they were trained for moments like this, moments when courage mattered more than numbers. The valley echoed again with gunfire, louder and closer this time. The SEALs braced themselves behind the rocks. Harris whispered to himself, "Hold the line," and just as he prepared to give the next command, something unexpected happened. A single gunshot, distant and sharp, cut through the chaos. One of the enemy fighters dropped instantly. Another shot followed, then another. Harris froze, trying to locate the source. Someone else was out there. But who? That single, precise shot would change everything, though none of them knew it yet. The gunfire echoed through the canyon like rolling thunder. Dust and smoke filled the air as the SEALs tried to hold their ground behind the rocks. The early morning light was spreading across the valley, revealing just how bad the situation really was. Enemy fighters were everywhere, on the cliffs, behind boulders, moving through the shadows. They were shouting orders in a language the SEALs didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The team was surrounded from every direction. Lieutenant Harris scanned the ridge through his scope. He counted at least 30 armed men, maybe more, all closing in. His heart pounded in his chest. The SEALs were trained for impossible missions, but this was worse than anything he had faced. "They've boxed us in," he said quietly. "We hold here. No one moves without my word." The men nodded, breathing hard but staying calm. Each of them was a professional, trained to fight under pressure. Still, even the best training couldn't change the fact that they were outnumbered 5-1. The enemy had the higher ground and knew the terrain. Every move the SEALs made was met with a burst of bullets from above. Petty Officer Carter, the youngest of the team, peeked over a rock to return fire. A bullet whizzed past his helmet, chipping stone beside his face. "They've got us pinned, sir," he yelled. Harris fired a few quick rounds toward the ridge, forcing the attackers to duck. "Stay low," he ordered. "We'll make them waste ammo before we move." Minutes felt like hours as the fight continued. The air was thick with gunpowder. Each time the SEALs tried to reposition, the enemy tightened the circle around them. Their radios were useless. Static filled every channel. The team had no way to call for air support or reinforcements. The extraction helicopter that was supposed to arrive at sunrise was still nowhere in sight. Harris didn't know if command even knew they were under attack. "Ammo check," he shouted. Each man quickly counted his magazines. Between all 6 SEALs, there were fewer than 10 full mags left. That meant they had maybe 15 minutes of heavy fighting before they were dry. Harris knew they couldn't win a shootout like this. They had to move, but every direction was a death trap. Then the enemy began to advance. Shouts echoed from both sides of the canyon. Dozens of fighters moved down from the cliffs, firing wildly as they came. The SEALs fired back with deadly precision, every shot aimed to hit. Harris dropped one attacker with a clean headshot, then another. But for every man that fell, 2 more appeared. Bullets pinged off the rocks, sending shards flying. Petty Officer Ryan, one of the older members of the team, suddenly cried out. He had been hit in the shoulder. Carter and another SEAL dragged him behind cover as Harris threw a smoke grenade to block the enemy's line of sight. "Stay with me, Ryan," Carter shouted, pressing a bandage on the wound. Ryan gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Just keep shooting." Harris looked at his men. They were bloodied, tired, and breathing hard, but their eyes were still sharp. They were SEALs, and quitting was never an option. He knew that if they could just reach the ridge to the north, they might find better cover or even a way out. But to get there, they'd have to cross open ground under enemy fire. It was risky, almost suicidal, but staying put would mean death for sure. "Listen up," Harris said, shouting over the gunfire. "We move on my mark. Carter, smoke left flank. Thompson, you take rear watch." The team nodded, ready to move. Harris counted down 3, 2, 1, and they broke cover. Smoke filled the air as they sprinted across the rocky ground. Bullets tore past them, hitting the dirt inches from their boots. Harris felt a searing pain in his arm as a round grazed him, but he kept running. They dove behind another set of rocks farther up the hill. For a moment it felt like they had escaped, but then more gunfire erupted from above. The enemy had predicted their move. Harris cursed under his breath. They were being hunted. Carter looked at him, fear flickering in his eyes. "Sir, we're surrounded again," he shouted. Harris reloaded his rifle and said calmly, "Then we fight our way out." The young SEAL nodded, swallowing his fear. Together, they fired toward the ridge, trying to push the enemy back. But no matter how many rounds they fired, the attackers kept coming. Then, a terrifying sound echoed across the canyon. A distant boom, followed by the whine of incoming mortar shells. "Incoming!" Harris yelled. The team ducked as explosions rocked the ground around them. Dirt and stone flew through the air. One of the blasts hit close enough to knock Harris off his feet. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He could barely hear Carter shouting his name. When the dust cleared, the SEALs were still alive, but barely. Their position was crumbling, their ammo nearly gone, and their only medic had taken shrapnel to the leg. Harris knew that if something didn't change soon, none of them would make it. He crawled to the edge of the rocks, lifting his scope one more time. Through the haze, he saw dozens of enemy fighters gathering near the lower ridge, preparing to rush their position. There was no time left. He whispered a silent prayer and steadied his rifle. Then it happened. Just as the enemy began to move, a single gunshot cracked through the air. One of the attackers dropped instantly. The SEALs froze. Another shot followed, perfectly timed. Then another. Each bullet hit with impossible accuracy. The advancing fighters began to panic, diving for cover, shouting in confusion. Harris looked toward the distant hills, trying to find the source of the shots. Through the scope, he saw a faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off metal. Someone was up there. A lone figure, almost invisible in the heat haze, was taking down the enemy one by one. The SEALs didn't know who it was, but in that moment they didn't care. All they knew was that help had come from somewhere, and that shadow on the hill was changing the battle completely. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time that morning, Harris felt something he hadn't felt in hours. Hope. The air was thick with dust and gunpowder. The SEALs were pressed tightly behind the rocks, their ears ringing from constant gunfire. Every man could feel the weight of the moment. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from command. Their ammo was running dangerously low. Each bullet they fired had to count. Lieutenant Harris wiped the sweat and blood from his face, glancing at his men. They were exhausted, breathing hard, their uniforms covered in dirt. But even in the middle of chaos, not one of them looked ready to give up. The enemy was shouting from the cliffs, getting closer with every passing minute. Harris knew they were being surrounded again. He looked at his rifle, only a few rounds left. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. If this was going to be their last stand, then they would make it one the enemy would never forget. "Stay sharp," Harris whispered. "They're coming in closer." The sound of boots on gravel echoed around them. Shadows moved along the canyon walls. The SEALs tightened their grips on their rifles, waiting. Then, without warning, a burst of automatic gunfire erupted. Bullets hit the rocks, sending shards flying. One of the SEALs returned fire, dropping an attacker who had tried to rush them. The battle exploded again. Loud, violent, and desperate. "Cover fire!" Harris shouted. Carter and Thompson leaned out from behind the rocks, firing short bursts. Harris grabbed a smoke grenade and threw it to create a barrier between them and the advancing enemy. The smoke billowed, giving the team a few seconds to regroup. Ryan, still wounded from before, struggled to reload his weapon. "Sir, we're running out of ammo," he gasped. Harris nodded grimly. "Then make every shot count." He glanced at the sky. The sun was higher now, heat rising from the sand. It had been hours since the ambush started, and still no sign of rescue. The radio remained silent. Harris crawled to the edge of their cover and peeked through his scope. The enemy fighters were regrouping across the open ground. There were too many of them, at least 20 within sight, maybe more hidden behind rocks. He knew they couldn't win like this. Their only hope was to hold out long enough for help to arrive, if help was even coming. The enemy began their next assault. Gunfire cracked through the canyon again. Bullets hit the rocks, kicking up dust around the seals. Carter was firing until his rifle clicked empty. "I'm out," he shouted. Harris tossed him a spare magazine, one of the few they had left. The team moved like one machine, no panic, just action. Years of training guided every movement. Then something strange happened. In the middle of the fight, there was a brief pause. A strange silence, like the battlefield was holding its breath. And then it came, a single distant gunshot. Sharp, clean, and unmistakable. One of the enemy fighters dropped instantly. Harris froze. He looked through his scope, searching for the source. Another shot rang out, then another. Each one hit its target perfectly, one bullet, one kill. The SEALs exchanged quick, confused glances. "Who the hell is shooting?" Carter muttered. Harris's heart began to race. He turned his scope toward the northern ridge, scanning the high ground. At first, he saw nothing but heat waves and dust. Then he caught it, a faint flash of sunlight reflecting off metal. Someone was up there, nearly a kilometer away. A lone sniper. The next few minutes changed everything. The mysterious sniper began picking off enemy fighters with perfect timing. Every time an enemy tried to move closer to the SEALs, a bullet found them first. One by one, the attackers started falling. The SEALs could barely believe it. Whoever that sniper was, he wasn't just skilled, he was saving their lives. The tide of battle shifted. The enemy, once confident and shouting, now started panicking. They didn't know where the shots were coming from. They fired wildly into the hills, trying to hit an invisible enemy. But the sniper's position was hidden too well. He was calm, patient, and deadly accurate. "Keep low," Harris ordered. "Whoever that is, he's helping us. Let him work." The SEALs used the brief break to tend to their wounded and reload what ammo they had left. The battlefield, once filled with chaos, was now echoing with the steady rhythm of single rifle shots, each one marking the fall of another enemy. After several minutes, the gunfire from the attackers began to fade. Those who remained alive were retreating, dragging their wounded away. The mysterious sniper had turned the impossible into hope. Harris peeked over the rock again. The ground below was littered with the bodies of the fallen. Smoke drifted slowly through the canyon. The silence that followed felt unreal. Carter let out a shaky laugh. "Sir, what just happened?" he said, his voice trembling with relief. Harris lowered his rifle, still watching the ridge. "Someone out there just saved our skins," he said quietly. The SEALs stayed alert, expecting the sniper to reveal himself, but no one came down from the hill. The figure was too far away to see clearly. All Harris could make out was a faint silhouette against the morning sun. A lone shadow with a rifle standing perfectly still. For the first time in hours, the SEALs could breathe. Ryan leaned back against a rock, clutching his bandaged shoulder. "We were dead men 5 minutes ago," he said softly. "Whoever that is up there, he's not just a sniper. He's an angel." Harris didn't answer. He kept staring through his scope at the distant ridge. He wanted to know who that person was. American? Allied? Or just some ghost in the mountains? Whoever it was, he had just changed everything. The SEALs used the lull in fighting to regroup. Harris checked the map on his wrist pad. They were still deep inside enemy territory, and the extraction point was miles away. But now, with the sniper covering them, there was a chance, a small one, to make it out alive. As the wind blew through the canyon, carrying the smell of smoke and dust, Harris whispered to himself, "We're not alone anymore." Little did he know, that lone figure on the ridge wasn't done yet. The battle wasn't over, it was only beginning. The battlefield was quiet for a few seconds after the last shot echoed through the valley. Smoke drifted slowly above the rocks, and the only sounds were the faint clicks of rifles being reloaded and the heavy breathing of the SEALs. No one spoke. Each man tried to understand what had just happened. They had been seconds away from being overrun, and then, out of nowhere, someone had started taking down the enemy one by one with deadly precision. Lieutenant Harris raised his rifle and peered through the scope toward the ridge. The heat shimmer made it hard to see clearly, but he caught a faint glimpse, a shadowed figure moving high above, barely visible against the sunlit rocks. The shape was small and steady, almost blending into the terrain. Harris couldn't believe it. "Someone's up there," he whispered. Carter, crouched beside him, frowned. "One of ours?" he asked, wiping dust off his face. Harris shook his head. "No idea, but whoever it is, they're saving our lives." Before he could say more, another crisp gunshot cracked through the air. The sound was sharp and distant, but the effect was immediate. Another enemy fighter dropped instantly. Then another. The shots were timed perfectly, spaced just a few seconds apart, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Each one hit with perfect accuracy. The SEALs started to realize they weren't alone in the fight anymore. The mysterious shooter seemed to know exactly where the enemy was, firing just as an attacker tried to flank the team. It was as if the sniper could read the battlefield like a book. Harris was amazed. This was no lucky shooting. This was pure skill. "Whoever that is," Ryan muttered, gripping his wounded arm, "he's a damn ghost." The enemy, who had been so confident minutes earlier, now hesitated. They shouted orders in confusion, firing blindly at the ridge, trying to find the hidden marksman. Dust clouds rose where their bullets struck, but the sniper never missed a beat. Each return shot from the hill was deliberate, patient, and deadly. The SEALs took advantage of the moment. "Let's move," Harris ordered. They shifted positions, dragging the wounded behind better cover while the sniper continued to lay down precise fire. Every time an enemy tried to chase them, the sniper's bullet found its target first. It was as if an invisible guardian was protecting them from above. Carter couldn't help but glance up at the ridge again. Through the haze, he thought he saw a glint, maybe a scope or a flash of sunlight on metal. "Sir, he's still there," Carter said. "Top of the ridge, about 1,000 meters out." Harris nodded, looking through his scope again. He caught sight of a small figure lying prone behind a rock, rifle aimed steadily toward the battlefield. The figure barely moved except to reload. Harris watched in awe. "That's not just a good shot," he said quietly. "That's a professional." The fight dragged on, but with every minute, the sniper's presence turned the tide. The SEALs began regaining ground. They fired in short bursts, moving strategically from cover to cover. The sniper's shots came exactly when needed, clearing paths, suppressing enemy lines, giving the SEALs precious seconds to move. At one point, an enemy fighter tried to sneak around from the rear, crawling through the sand toward the team's flank. Before Harris could even warn his men, a single bullet struck the attacker dead center. Harris looked up toward the ridge again. The sniper was still watching over them, never missing a beat. The teamwork, though silent and unseen, felt almost supernatural. The SEALs didn't know who the sniper was or how he had found them, but it felt like he could hear their thoughts, like he knew exactly what they needed, and when. The battlefield was now alive with the rhythm of cooperation between two forces who had never met. "Keep pushing forward," Harris commanded. The SEALs advanced slowly, taking back ground they'd lost earlier in the fight. Enemy fire was growing weaker now. Their formations were breaking apart. Those who weren't dead were retreating deeper into the canyon, terrified of the unseen shooter who could strike from anywhere. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the hot desert air. Sweat ran down Harris's neck as he led his men to higher ground. He could see the bodies of the fallen enemy scattered across the valley floor. The sniper had turned what seemed like a hopeless ambush into a fight they might actually survive. After nearly an hour of exchanges, the gunfire finally started to fade. The silence that followed felt strange, heavy and unreal. The SEALs looked at each other, breathing hard, their ears still ringing. "Is it over?" Carter asked cautiously. Harris scanned the ridge once more. The figure was still there, motionless, watching. Then slowly the sniper stood up. The distance was great, but Harris could see the tall, calm stance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The figure lowered the rifle, scanned the battlefield one last time, and then gave a small nod, almost like a silent signal before vanishing behind the ridge. The SEALs stared in disbelief. "He's gone," Ryan said, almost whispering. Harris didn't reply right away. His chest felt tight with emotion. Relief, gratitude, and curiosity all mixed together. Whoever that person was, he had risked his life to save them without ever asking for help or recognition. For several minutes, the SEALs sat in silence, listening to the distant wind. Harris finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "He came out of nowhere, and just like that he's gone." Carter looked at him. "You think he's one of ours?" Harris shook his head slowly. "Doesn't matter who he is. Today he was on our side." As the team began to regroup and check their weapons, Harris couldn't stop thinking about the figure on the hill, the lone shadow who had turned certain death into survival. He'd been in combat for years, but he had never seen anything like it. The timing, the skill, the courage, it was something beyond normal training. When the SEALs finally prepared to move toward a safer location, Harris looked back one last time at the ridge. The hill was quiet now, the rocks empty, but in his mind he could still see that silhouette, calm, focused, almost ghost-like. For the first time since the mission had gone wrong, Harris felt a spark of hope. The enemy might still be out there, the radio might still be dead, but now they had a chance. Someone out there had their backs. A silent protector, a shadow on the hill. And though they didn't know his name or where he came from, every man on that team knew one thing for sure. That sniper had just changed everything. The sun was high now, burning down on the canyon. Smoke still hung in the air from the last wave of gunfire. The SEALs were covered in dust and sweat, their uniforms torn, their faces streaked with dirt. They were alive, something none of them thought would be possible just an hour ago. And the reason was clear: the mysterious sniper on the hill. Lieutenant Harris crouched behind a large rock, trying to get a clear view of the ridge. The figure was gone now, hidden once again among the stones and shadows. "He's still up there," Harris said quietly. "I can feel it." Carter, the youngest SEAL, was checking his weapon. "Whoever he is, sir, he shoots better than anyone I've ever seen," he said, shaking his head. "You think he's special forces?" "Maybe," Harris replied. "But that kind of accuracy? That's more than skill. That's instinct." They didn't have time to wonder. A faint rustling echoed through the canyon again. Movement. The enemy wasn't finished yet. From the north side, more figures appeared, cautiously approaching through the dust. Harris cursed under his breath. They were regrouping for another attack. The team readied their weapons, though ammo was nearly gone. Then, before the enemy could even take their first shot, the sharp sound of a rifle cracked again from the hill. One of the fighters dropped instantly. Then another. The SEALs watched as the sniper began firing in rhythm. Calm, steady, perfectly timed shots. It was as if he knew exactly when the enemy would appear. Every bullet hit its mark. "Look at that," Ryan whispered, amazed. "He's covering our flanks without even being told." It became clear that the sniper wasn't just firing randomly. He was working with them, coordinating without a word. Each time the SEALs shifted position, the sniper adjusted his aim to match their movement. When Harris signaled for two men to move to a nearby ridge, the sniper immediately provided covering fire, forcing the enemy to take cover. The teamwork felt almost unreal. They had never trained together, never met, yet they moved like one unit. Harris started to realize that whoever was up there had combat instincts that matched his own. Someone who understood exactly how a SEAL team operated. The SEALs took this chance to reposition. Carter and Thompson dragged the wounded Ryan behind a boulder while Harris and another man covered them. Every time the enemy tried to attack, a precise shot from the ridge would stop them cold. The battlefield felt different now, controlled, almost choreographed. The mysterious sniper was dictating the flow of the fight from above, one bullet at a time. After about 15 minutes of intense shooting, the SEALs had cleared most of the canyon. The enemy numbers were thinning fast. Those who remained were retreating in panic, firing wildly as they fell back. The sniper didn't chase them. Instead, he focused on eliminating anyone who tried to take aim at the SEALs. His discipline was remarkable, no wasted shots, no unnecessary noise. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the team finally had a moment to breathe. Carter looked up toward the ridge again. "I can't even see him now," he said softly. "How does he do that?" Harris didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the precision, the silence, the perfect timing. This wasn't luck, it was training, experience, and a level of calm most soldiers never reach. "He's a pro," Harris finally said. "Someone who's seen a lot of war." Just then, a faint signal crackled through the radio. Static at first, then a voice. "Team Delta, this is Overwatch. You're clear to move north. I've got your 6. The voice was calm, deep, and confident. The SEALs froze for a moment. Overwatch. That had to be the sniper. Harris grabbed the radio. "Overwatch, identify yourself," he said. No answer came for a few seconds. Then the voice replied, "No time for that, Lieutenant. Move now. You've got company coming in from the East Ridge." Harris didn't waste a second. "You heard him," he shouted. The team gathered their gear and started moving. As they ran through the canyon, more gunfire erupted behind them, the new enemy reinforcements. But just like before, the sniper covered their retreat. His shots echoed from high above, buying them precious seconds to escape. Every time the SEALs reached a new position, the sniper's voice came through the radio again, guiding them. "Left ridge clear. Keep moving. 2 hostiles at your 9 o'clock. Take cover behind the big rock." It was like having eyes in the sky, but sharper, personal, precise, and always one step ahead. Carter was astonished. "He's directing us like he's right here," he said between breaths. "He might as well be," Harris replied. "Stay close and follow his lead." The sniper's coordination was flawless. When the SEALs reached a narrow pass, the voice came through again. "Hold position. I've got eyes on your exit route. Wait for my mark." Seconds later, a burst of fire came from the hill. 3 quick shots, 3 enemies down. "You're clear. Move now." The SEALs sprinted through the pass, their boots hitting the sand hard, adrenaline pumping through their veins. For the first time since the ambush began, they were gaining ground, all because of the man they still hadn't seen clearly. As they reached a temporary safe zone between 2 large cliffs, Harris called out on the radio again. "Overwatch, what's your position? We can cover you on the way down." The voice replied, calm and distant. "Negative, Lieutenant. Stay focused on your evac point. I'll handle the rest." Harris wanted to argue, but something in the sniper's tone told him not to. This was someone who didn't need help, someone who preferred to stay in the shadows. The team took a moment to rest. Carter looked up toward the ridge, shading his eyes. "Do you think he's alone up there?" Harris nodded slowly. "Yeah, and he's doing the work of 10 men. The radio crackled one last time. "Evac bird is 10 minutes out. You'll be safe once you hit the North Valley. Keep moving. I'll cover until you're clear." Then the transmission ended. The SEALs gathered themselves and began the final trek toward their extraction point, guided once again by the sniper's unseen protection. Each gunshot behind them was like a heartbeat, steady, sure, and protective. For every man in that team, one thought echoed silently in their minds. They weren't fighting alone anymore. Someone unseen, someone deadly and disciplined, was watching over them. A ghost in the hills who never missed, never spoke more than needed, and never asked for thanks. And though they didn't yet know his name, the SEALs had already given him one, the Silent Guardian. The team was exhausted but alive. Every muscle in their bodies ached. Their uniforms were torn, and their ammunition was nearly gone. Yet, as they moved through the rocky terrain toward the extraction point, they felt a strange kind of strength, not from rest, but from hope. They had survived what should have been impossible, and it was all because of the man they called the Silent Guardian. Lieutenant Harris led the group through the canyon, his eyes scanning every ridge and shadow. "Stay sharp," he whispered. "We're not out yet." The desert air felt heavy, thick with the smell of gunpowder and dust. The silence was uneasy. It was the kind of quiet that came before something big, the kind that made even the most trained soldiers tighten their grip on their weapons. Then, just as the team reached an open stretch between two cliffs, a deep, distant rumble broke the silence. Carter froze. "That's not thunder," he said. The ground trembled slightly under their boots. Harris looked up and saw smoke on the horizon. Vehicles, heading straight for them. "Convoy!" shouted Ryan. Multiple trucks, east side. The SEALs ducked behind the nearest rocks. Through his binoculars, Harris could see at least 2 enemy trucks loaded with fighters, speeding toward them, kicking up a storm of dust. They were heavily armed, far more than the SEALs could handle with their remaining ammo. Harris clenched his jaw. "They're cutting off our exit," he said. Before anyone could respond, the radio crackled again. That calm, familiar voice. "Overwatch here. Hold your fire. I've got eyes on the convoy." Carter smiled faintly. "He's still with us," he whispered. From the far ridge, a flash of light, the glint of a rifle scope. Then the first shot. The lead truck's driver slumped over, and the vehicle swerved violently, crashing into the side of the canyon wall. The men in the back jumped out, shouting orders, but another shot followed, dropping one of them instantly. The second truck tried to slow down, but the sniper's fire didn't stop. One by one, the attackers fell before they could even spot where the bullets were coming from. The SEALs watched in silent awe. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Every shot was deliberate, each one placed to protect them. The sniper wasn't just defending. He was dismantling the attack piece by piece. Still, some of the enemy fighters began to spread out, taking cover behind rocks and returning fire toward the ridge. Bullets ricocheted off the stones, echoing through the canyon. "They've spotted his position," Ryan yelled. Harris grabbed his radio. "Overwatch, they're targeting you." But the sniper's voice came back steady and calm. "Copy that, Lieutenant. Keep your heads down." "I'm fine." A new wave of shots erupted from the ridge. Faster this time, sharper. Harris realized the sniper had switched to rapid precision, not just shooting but moving between shots, never staying in one place. The enemy couldn't pin him down. Every time they tried, he disappeared and reappeared from a different angle. The SEALs took advantage of the distraction. "Let's move," Harris ordered. The team began flanking the enemy, using the rocks for cover. The sniper's fire guided them like a compass, forcing the fighters into open ground. Harris and Carter pushed forward, tossing grenades toward the enemy's flank. Explosions shook the canyon walls, sending dust and debris into the air. It was chaos, the kind of chaos only war could bring, but within it, there was rhythm. The SEALs moved like ghosts, silent and deadly, their every step timed with the echoing shots from the hill. Soon, the once confident enemy fighters were retreating, leaving behind their wounded and their weapons. One by one, the sounds of battle faded into silence. When it was over, Harris raised his radio. "Overwatch, the convoy's down. We're clear for now." There was a pause, then the sniper's calm reply, "Good work, team. You've got 5 minutes before more arrive. Head north. I'll cover." The SEALs gathered their gear quickly and started moving again. As they climbed a narrow path between the cliffs, Carter glanced back at the ridge. He thought he saw a shadow moving, a figure adjusting a rifle, then disappearing into the heat haze. "Sir," Carter said quietly, "who do you think he is?" Harris didn't answer right away. "Someone who's seen too much," he said finally. "And someone who doesn't want to be seen again." The heat was brutal as they pushed forward. Sweat dripped into their eyes, and their lungs burned with every breath. But the sniper stayed with them, guiding them through the radio. He warned them of traps, ambush points, even the direction of the wind that carried sound. It was like he had an invisible map of the entire canyon in his mind. Finally, the SEALs reached a ridge overlooking a small valley, their extraction point. The sound of distant rotors echoed through the air. The evac helicopter was approaching. Relief swept over the team, but it didn't last long. "Contact! East Ridge!" shouted Thompson. A final wave of enemies appeared, sprinting toward the valley, determined to stop them. "Overwatch, we need cover fire," Harris yelled into the radio. There was no answer at first. Then suddenly the sound of the sniper rifle roared again. Faster, louder, closer than before. He wasn't on the hill anymore. He had moved down, putting himself between the SEALs and the attackers. The shots were relentless. Every pull of the trigger was life or death, and every shot landed true. The sniper's position was now exposed, and the enemy turned all their fire toward him. Dust exploded around him as bullets hit the ground, but he didn't stop. Harris and his team used the moment to reach the evac zone. The helicopter touched down, its blades whipping up sand. "Go!" Harris ordered, pushing his men toward it. But he stayed back for a moment, scanning the battlefield for the sniper. He finally spotted him. A lone figure standing on a rocky ledge, still firing, covering their retreat. Then, as the helicopter lifted off, Harris saw the man lower his rifle and look up, just for a second. Even from a distance, their eyes met. Harris gave a silent nod of respect. The sniper raised his hand slightly, a small salute, and then turned away, disappearing once again into the smoke and dust. As the helicopter carried the SEALs to safety, Harris sat quietly, watching the shrinking canyon below. "Whoever he was," Carter said softly, "he saved us all." Harris nodded. "Yeah," he replied, "but some heroes don't stay for thanks. They just vanish when the job's done." No one spoke after that. The only sound was the beating of the helicopter blades, and the memory of the rifle that had changed everything. The helicopter blades spun faster, lifting the SEALs high above the canyon. Dust and smoke swirled beneath them, hiding the place where the unknown sniper had vanished. No one spoke during the flight. The men just sat there in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. Each of them knew they were alive only because of him, the lone figure on the ridge who fought like a ghost and disappeared without a trace. Lieutenant Harris stared out of the open side door of the chopper. His mind replayed the last moment he saw the sniper, that silent salute before he faded into the desert. There was something familiar about him, something Harris couldn't shake off. But he didn't know why. When they landed back at the forward operating base, medics rushed over to check the wounded. Carter had a cut on his arm. Ryan was limping. Everyone was tired, dirty, and drained. Yet the first question they all asked their commander was the same. Who was he? Harris didn't have an answer. "We'll find out," he promised. But deep down, he wasn't sure they ever would. A few hours later, after reports were written and weapons cleaned, Harris went to the communications tent. He needed to speak with HQ about the mysterious radio contact who called himself Overwatch. The signal logs were pulled up on the screen. The tech officer frowned as he looked through the data. "Sir, this is strange," the officer said. "The transmission didn't come from any registered call sign. It came from an unlisted military channel, one that hasn't been active in years." Harris's brow furrowed. "Years?" "Yes, sir. According to our records, that channel belonged to a special unit, Task Force Phantom. But that group was disbanded 5 years ago after their leader went missing in action." The words hit Harris like a shock. He had heard of Task Force Phantom, an elite team that operated deep behind enemy lines, known for impossible missions and unseen victories. But most of them were believed dead or retired. Harris leaned closer to the screen. Who was the leader? The officer scrolled through the old files and replied, "Captain Daniel Cross. Code name, Overwatch." Harris froze. He knew that name. Years ago, during his first deployment, he had read about Captain Cross, a legendary sniper who saved an entire platoon during a siege in Afghanistan. Cross was known for never missing a shot and never leaving a man behind. But one mission went wrong. His team was ambushed and only he was never found. Everyone thought he was dead. But now Harris wasn't so sure. Later that night, Harris gathered his men in the tent. "I think I know who helped us," he said quietly. The team looked at him with tired but curious eyes. His name was Captain Daniel Cross, a legend. He went missing years ago, but I think he's still out there. Carter frowned. "You mean that guy from the stories? The ghost sniper who took out a whole enemy platoon alone?" Harris nodded. That's him. And if I'm right, he just saved us. The team exchanged silent glances. It sounded unbelievable, like a war myth come to life. But after what they'd seen, none of them doubted it. Over the next few days, the SEALs kept trying to track him. They searched the area around the canyon, but there were no footprints, no casings, no food wrappers, nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, one morning, while the sun was still low, Harris received a message from base security. "Sir, you need to see this," the guard said. On the table was a small black case that had been left at the gate before dawn. There were no footprints nearby, no sign of who delivered it. Inside the case was a single sniper bullet, polished and unused, and a folded piece of paper. Harris opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat and firm. "Lieutenant, you led your men well. Keep them alive. The fight isn't over, but it's yours now. DC." Harris stared at the note for a long time. DC, Daniel Cross. There was no doubt left. The man who saved them was alive. Carter came up beside him. "So he really was the ghost," he said softly. "Not a ghost," Harris replied, folding the paper. "Just a soldier who never stopped fighting." In the days that followed, word of their survival spread quietly through the base. Some soldiers whispered about the shadow sniper, who appeared from nowhere. Others called him the Phantom, but the SEALs didn't speak much about him. For them, he wasn't just a legend, he was real. One evening, Harris stood alone at the edge of the camp, watching the sunset over the desert. The orange light stretched across the horizon, turning the sand gold. Somewhere out there, he knew Daniel Cross was still watching, protecting others the way he had protected them. Harris spoke softly to the wind. "Thank you, Captain," he said. And though there was no reply, Harris could almost imagine hearing a faint voice over the radio. The same calm tone that had guided them through the worst moments. "Keep moving, Lieutenant. I've got your six." The words echoed in his mind, and for the first time in days, Harris felt peace. He knew they hadn't just been saved. They had been reminded of what true courage looked like. Not medals, not ranks, not glory, but the quiet strength of a man who fought from the shadows so others could live. The SEALs would never see him again, but his presence stayed with them. Every mission after that felt different. Every shot they took carried a part of his legacy. Precision, patience, purpose. Harris kept the bullet and the note in his vest pocket wherever he went. It was a silent reminder that even in the darkest moments, someone could still stand between life and death, unseen but unwavering. And somewhere, high in the mountains or deep in the desert, a lone sniper watched over them. A man who had once been lost to the world, but had found his purpose again in the fire of battle. The legend of Overwatch lived on, not as a myth, but as the truth. The story of a soldier who refused to die, who became a shadow for those who still had light to protect. A few weeks had passed since the SEALs were rescued from the canyon, but the memory of that day still burned in their minds. The sound of the sniper's rifle, the calm voice guiding them through chaos, and that final salute before he vanished. None of them could forget it. For Lieutenant Harris, it became more than just a memory. It became a mission. He couldn't stop thinking about Captain Daniel Cross, the man who was supposed to be dead, yet had saved them all. The note and the single bullet he left behind were now kept in Harris's locker, locked away like a sacred secret. But Harris needed to know more. He wanted to understand why the legendary sniper had chosen to stay hidden in the desert, fighting alone. One morning, Harris decided to go back to the canyon. The command base didn't approve, but he didn't care. He took Carter with him, and together they traveled back to the same dusty ridges where everything had happened. The desert was silent now, only the wind whispering through the rocks. They found the spot where the SEALs had made their stand, the same place the sniper had fired from. Empty bullet shells lay buried in the sand, half covered by dust. Harris crouched down and picked one up. "He was here," he said quietly. "Right here." Carter looked around. "If he's still alive, do you think he's watching us now?" Harris didn't answer. He scanned the cliffs, but there was no movement, only silence. Then, near the rocks, something caught his eye. A small metal tag glinting in the sunlight. Harris reached for it and froze as he read the name engraved on it. D. Cross. It was his dog tag. Harris closed his fist around it. "He left this on purpose," he said. "He wanted us to find it." When they returned to the base, Harris handed the tag to the intelligence officer. After hours of searching through old classified records, the officer found a debrief file that had been sealed for years, a mission report marked top secret. The file told a story that made the entire team fall silent. 5 years earlier, Captain Daniel Cross and his team, Task Force Phantom, had been sent deep into enemy territory to rescue civilians trapped behind the front lines. It was supposed to be a one-day mission, but they were ambushed. Cross and his men fought for 3 days, outnumbered and surrounded. He managed to save the civilians, but his entire team was killed. When extraction came, he refused to leave their bodies behind. He stayed until the end alone, covering the civilians' escape. When reinforcements finally arrived, there was no sign of him. The area was bombed soon after, and everyone assumed he had died. But the truth was different. Cross had survived, badly wounded, but he refused to return. He blamed himself for the deaths of his men. He disappeared into the mountains, becoming a ghost. Over the years, he helped soldiers who were ambushed or trapped, never revealing who he was, never accepting help. He became a legend known only by his call sign, Overwatch. As Harris finished reading the report, his throat tightened. "He wasn't hiding," he said softly. "He was guarding the place where his team fell." Carter nodded. "That's why he stayed in the desert all these years. It was his battlefield, his promise." The room went quiet. None of the SEALs spoke for a long time. They realized that Cross wasn't just a sniper. He was a man carrying the weight of every life he couldn't save. He stayed behind not because he wanted to disappear, but because he couldn't leave the ghosts of his brothers. That night, Harris made a decision. The next morning, the SEAL team returned to the canyon, not for a mission, but for something far more important. They carried a small metal plaque with them. At the highest point of the ridge, the same spot where Cross had given them cover, they placed it into the rock. The plaque read, "In honor of Captain Daniel Cross, Overwatch. He fought alone so others could live. His watch never ended." The team stood in silence as the wind blew over the ridge. Harris took the bullet Cross had left him and placed it beside the plaque. "Rest easy, Captain," he said quietly. "We'll take it from here." The sun was setting, painting the canyon in shades of gold and red. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful. Then, faintly, a sound echoed through the distance. A single rifle shot. Carter looked up sharply. "Did you hear that?" Harris smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "I did." They didn't know where the shot came from. Maybe from another ridge, maybe just the wind playing tricks, but deep down they all felt the same thing. Captain Cross was still out there somewhere, still watching. When the team returned to base, they requested that the area be marked as a memorial zone. It was approved quietly, without publicity, just as Cross would have wanted. From then on, any SEAL who passed through the desert would stop there for a moment of silence. Some said they could still feel someone watching over them from the hills. Harris kept Cross's dog tag close, hanging it on the chain with his own. On the back, he had one line engraved, "For the one who never stopped protecting us." Years later, the story of the lone sniper became a quiet legend among soldiers. They spoke of him in whispers. A shadow who appeared in impossible moments. A man who had turned guilt into purpose and loneliness into strength. For Harris and his team, it was more than a story. It was a truth they had lived through. Every mission they went on after that carried his spirit. Steady, calm, and watchful. Whenever the sky grew dark and gunfire echoed through the night, they remembered that voice in their radios. "Stay low. You're not alone. I've got your six." And even though the world would never know the full story of Captain Daniel Cross, the SEALs did. He wasn't gone. He had simply become what he was always meant to be. The unseen protector, the silent guardian, the man in the shadows who turned the tide when all hope was lost. The legend of Overwatch lived forever, carried not in history books, but in the hearts of every soldier who believed that even in the darkest hour, There is always someone watching from the hills, calm, precise, and ready to protect.